Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the East-West Passenger Rail Study virtual public meeting. We'll wait a few minutes until people begin to join us, and we'll start the program. Just a couple minutes. Once again, we will start in just a minute. I see the number of participants seems to be leveling off, so I'll wait another half a minute. Hello, everyone. My name is Nancy Farrell, and I'm going to be moderating the meeting this evening. Thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate you sharing an hour and a half with us as we talk about the East-West Passenger Rail Study. I'm from Maginaville Associates, and we've been working on the civic engagement for the project, so I'm happy to be here with you this evening. I'd like to remind you of the rules for participating. Everyone who is on the call will be muted until there's time for having a discussion and asking questions. There's also a closed caption option at the bottom of your screen you can look at now. It's CC, closed caption. If you'd like, you can click that and you will see closed captioning throughout the presentation and discussion. We also have a Spanish interpreter who will be translating the meeting tonight, and Gabriella will take a moment now to describe that process. I will also ask you to choose the language that you want to participate in. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see a globe and you can choose English or Spanish. Please do that now, and Gabriella will be explaining the process to us. Gracias, Gabriela. That's great. Thank you. There will be time for public comment. At a certain point in the meeting, we're going to pause to see if you have any substantive questions or the presentation was at all confusing or anything like that. During the meeting, you can put a question in the Q&A. We'd ask you to try to do only one at a time. And when we get to the comment period, you'll be able to virtually raise your hand and ask a question. We'll probably move back and forth between the Q&A and the raised hands at that time. Depending on how many people join us, I might have to ask you to keep your questions or comments very brief. We do want to get as many as possible into the event this evening so we can hear from as many people as we can. I'd like to start by introducing the team members, and they will say hello, waving or saying hello when we get there. Ethan Britlin and Michaela Niles are MassDOT's co-project managers. Ethan and Michaela.
Hello.
Hello.
Great. Drew Galloway is our consultant project manager from WSP.
Good evening.
Okay. And Ned Codd is the deputy project manager from WSP.
Hello.
Laura McWethy is our ridership modeler.
Hello.
Hi, Laura. Sophie Cohen is our expert on the BCA, which everyone knows I love.
Hello, everyone.
And Meredith Schlesinger is with us from the Rail and Transit Division. Meredith?
Hi, everyone.
Thank you. So we're going to go to slide 2. And Emily, I'm sorry, Emily's our conductor. She's driving the train tonight.
Hi, everyone.
So this is our agenda for the meeting. We're going to briefly review the study process and next steps. We're going to review the 3 final alternatives, which many of you commented on since our last meeting. Ethan will go through the alternatives evaluation and several of the criteria and talk through them in detail. There's quite a lot of information, so but also this presentation is posted on the website, so you can look at it afterwards if you're writing comments and you need to refresh your memory. Then we'll go to public comment, and then we'll talk about the next steps. And I believe I'm going to hand it over to Ethan at this point.
Thank you, Nancy. I want to thank the team as well and everybody here at the public meeting, the attendees. So advanced slide, Emily. So I'm just going to briefly cover the study process and next steps just to, because this is a public meeting. We do have advisory committee meetings that they're more sort of in tune with our process. So I'm just going to briefly cover our study process. So again, this is a conceptual planning study. We've been conducting it for about 2 years, and it involves a lot of work, a lot of data collection and analysis. And so as you can see on our flow chart here, the star towards the end is actually where we are in the process. So as you can see, we're right there at the end. But from the beginning, we have to go through our existing conditions work, basically understanding what's out there, what our issues and opportunities are. We go through an alternatives development process. We also go through multiple steps in this study of alternatives evaluation, or we call it analysis as well. And then as you can see, the last couple of pieces of the flow chart bring us through the end of our report, which has findings, recommendations, next steps, and a draft report, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation. But there is a draft report out there for 30-day public comment on the street on our website. And all throughout the entire process, as I noted across the bottom, is public involvement. And we have general public meetings, of which this is the 3rd. And we also have study advisory committee meetings, which are invited stakeholders that provide feedback on the work we do. And we've had 6 of those meetings. So we are coming to the end of our study process. So I want to advance the next slide. So on that prior slide, you saw that we had analyzed 6 alternatives and then narrowed it down to 3. And this slide here, this table, shows the 3 final alternatives that were selected for our final analysis. And we have 2 corridor type families. Alternative 3, the very first alternative there, it shares the track with CSX for the entire corridor, while alternatives 4 and 5, 4 and 4-5 hybrid create a new separate track for a portion of the corridor and shares the track with CSX for the remainder of the corridor. And I'll get into more detail on the sharing. So all 3 alternatives are rail service between Pittsfield and Boston. They do, as well as the larger cities, it includes stops in Chester and Palmer. And the last row there, it talks about infrastructure investments. As you go up the alternatives in higher numbers, they tend to progressively increase in infrastructure investment intended to increase speeds and lower the travel time. So next slide, please, Emily. So that prior slide, those were the 3 alternatives in table format. This is the graphical format of alternative 3. And there's a lot of information to convey on this graphic. So I just wanted to walk through a bit of the legend just at a high level to understand what it is that we're looking at. So this is the corridor between Pittsfield and Boston. And as you can see, the black line throughout the corridor represents the existing double track. A primary part of alternative 3 is that it proposes to double track the segment between Pittsfield and Springfield, as well as Springfield and Worcester. So if you look at the yellow line on the graphic, that represents the restoration of the double track. And I also want to note on this slide, but as we progress through the next 2 slides, if you look at the bottom of the graphic, it's what we're affectionately calling it a speed snake, and that represents the speeds that can be the scheduled speeds for each of the alternatives. So if you look at this graphic here at the bottom between Springfield and Worcester, you have generally speeds in the 70 to 80 range. So as we go through the alternatives, look at that portion of the graphic, and that's really representative of what each alternative is meant to do. So next slide, please. So this is alternative 4. And alternative 4, again, double tracks between Pittsfield and Springfield. But between Springfield and Worcester, if you look at the graphic, there's a red line along the corridor between Springfield and Worcester. That represents new single track. So separation from the CSX freight tracks for passenger only. Slide 7, please. So this is the alternative 4-5 hybrid. It's very similar to alternative 4, but one thing, the primary difference between alternative 4 and the 4-5 hybrid, there are additional realignments between Springfield and Worcester to further reduce travel time. These are represented in blue along the corridor between Springfield and Worcester. And I'm not sure if you're able to track, but on the speed stake at the bottom, as you go through alternatives, the colors gradually gain speed up. And so on this graphic, you have a lot more of the blue, purple, and pink segments. So that's representing the higher speeds and resulting lower travel times. Next slide, please. So this table here is primarily meant to represent the difference between alternative 4 and the 4-5 hybrid. We hadn't shown this information before, so we just wanted to show it in tabular format. And again, these are the realignments in alternative 4-5 hybrid, and it's meant to straighten the curves, thereby increasing speed and reducing travel times. There are varying lengths of some of these sections, the varying travel time savings, net cost. But I think one column to really focus in on is the last columns. That's the rate. So that's the calculated cost of what it would take in millions of dollars to reduce travel time by 1 minute. So as you can see, there are varying degrees of cost per reduction of travel time. So I highlight this because this is something to consider in the context of next steps. Some of them are extremely expensive per cost per mile reduction, and others aren't. So it's something to think about as we look at any kind of future project development. Next slide, please. This slide shows those realignments in a graphical format. So if you look at the yellow is meant to represents the current alignment. The orange represents the straightening. So as you can see, the existing corridor has quite a bit of curvature to it. So these straightenings are meant to reduce travel time. And next slide, please. We're going to transition to alternatives evaluation now that we've gone over what the final 3 alternatives are. These are just some overall key findings or takeaways. So after all of our analysis, the ridership range on a daily basis is about 900 up to 1,500. We'll get into more detail on the ridership in later slides. For the three alternatives, the conceptual cost estimates range at the low end of 2.4 billion, and the 4-5 hybrid is 4.6 billion. Another key finding when we did our analysis is that the interaction between the passenger and freight trains is higher in the Pittsfield to Springfield segment. And that's primarily due to sharing the double track between freight and passenger service. There's a higher level of freight volumes west of Springfield, and there's lower speeds because of the steep grades for the freight trains. And another key finding, or really a takeaway, and it's one thing that I hadn't noted before, but for all three alternatives, the Pittsfield to Springfield segment and the Worcester to Boston segment are essentially the same. So for all three alternatives, it's the Springfield to Worcester segment that really is the primary difference in improvements, costs, and travel time. Next slide, please. These are the evaluation criteria that will be covered in the following slides. I just wanted to highlight that service performance and the subcategories, we're going to show travel times, frequency, stops, and ridership. Costs, we're going to take a bit of a deep dive into our conceptual costs, both how we came up with them and what we have for final numbers. And we're also going to cover our environmental and community impacts, as well as our benefit cost analysis. Next slide, please, Emily. Here is the first set of metrics for frequency, travel time, and speed. Again, as I noted, the Worcester to Boston segment and Pittsfield to Springfield segment are essentially the same through the three alternatives. So if you look at the travel times for those segments, it's 53 minutes roughly between Worcester and Boston, and between Pittsfield to Springfield, it's an hour 12. Those are constant through the three alternatives. The important thing to note here is the Springfield to Worcester segment. For alternative 3, it's an hour 4 minutes. For alternative 4, it's 54 minutes. And as you can see, 4-5 hybrid is 44 minutes. So the alternatives essentially reduce travel time by 10 minutes over each other. And again, from alternative 3 to alternative 4, that is the separation of track. And then from 4 to 4-5 hybrid, that is the additional realignments to straighten the curves. So each one of those progressive improvements would reduce travel time by 10 minutes. One thing I just wanted to note, we do include maximum operating speed, but realistically, we understand that travel time and average speed are more reflective of the passenger experience. So we just want people to note and focus on that. Next slide, please. So the prior slide was was daily ridership. We wanted to show, I'm sorry, my mistake. This is the daily ridership. So this is the final ridership that we conducted through our prior process, both with advisory committee and the public. There were concerns about the ridership. So for the final analysis, we revised our ridership methodology, and we actually added a range. So we have a sort of a low end and a high end for each alternative. So this slide, as you can see, each alternative 3, 4, and 4, 5, they have 2 columns for each one. For each alternative, the left column is the low end, the right column is the higher end. And I wanted to just talk briefly about why we have 2. So in order to estimate ridership, we, on a corridor that has either limited or no service right now, we have to come up with what we call a proxy. So it needs to be, we use an existing service as a base, but we don't just take that existing service and use it. We look at an existing base, but we also modify it. So I think there may have been a misconception that we just used another service to estimate. We do use it as a base, but there's a lot of adjustments that are done to try to make it similar to what an east-west service would be. So just to refresh, as you can see on that first column for alternative 3, we're calling it the enhanced Hartford line forecast scenario proxy. We had used an initial, our initial proxy was just called the Hartford line proxy. We enhanced this proxy to include New Haven for the purpose of getting a larger market similar to Boston. We also, based on comments from the public, from the advisory committee, we also looked at the Downeaster service, which does go to Boston. So we used both the enhanced Hartford line and the Downeaster as 2 proxies. We kept the 20-mile catchment for the stations because they are straight line catchments and not 20 miles as the driver drives to the station. So we felt that sufficiently captured rural populations. We did modify the Springfield station buffer because there's existing service north-south, and so we don't overlap the stations. The initial ridership estimates kind of had to squish the station buffers, and so it required an actual somebody to get on somewhere near Amherst, get on the north-south service, go down to Springfield and transfer. So we adjusted the station buffer to better capture student and other populations in the Amherst area, so they did not have to make a transfer. They could drive directly to Springfield. And lastly, we included induced demand on the enhanced Hartford line because it's still growing. And we did not include induced demand for the Downeaster proxy because it is a fairly mature service already. So again, as we noted earlier in the key findings and takeaways, the low end was 922 for alternative 3. Alternative 3 goes up to almost 1,200. And again, at the high end of 1,500, that's the alternative 4 or 5 hybrid. Next slide, please. So we showed the daily ridership. Just we chose daily to lead with daily because we feel it helps people wrap their head around ridership. But this is the annual ridership. So it's just an extrapolation of the daily ridership. And as you can see, the low end is 278,000 to 469,000 for alternative 4 or 5 hybrid. Next slide, please. Okay, key findings of costing. So we're going to shift and talk a bit about costing here. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, in order to reach higher speeds and lower travel time for alternative 4 and 4 or 5 hybrid, we needed to comply with CSX guidance and provide a separate passenger-only track between Springfield and Worcester. This results in a cost increase of $1.5 billion above alternative 3. Again, the proposed improvements on the bookend segments for all 3 alternatives are the same. The cost difference between alternative 4 and 4 or 5 hybrid is primarily related to those track realignments we showed you in the graphic. So the straightening of the curve between Worcester and Springfield. This reduces the travel time by about 10 minutes. And one thing we wanted to note for costing at this stage of conceptual planning, we have standard contingencies for various elements of the costing, and it equals about 23% of the overall cost estimate. And we add contingencies in to account for the unknowns because we are at the conceptual planning stage. And we understand there are unknowns at this point. Next slide, please. So I've talked a bit about this in prior meetings, but we just wanted to reiterate that for the conceptual cost estimates, we did refine them for the final 3, but I wanted to note that we followed federal guidelines for our cost estimation. So it was FRA, Federal Rail Administration guidance. We developed quantities, so basically elements that would need to be either constructed, built, changed, impacted, things like that. Those are all GIS based. We looked at unit costs, so how to calculate the actual cost of each unit. And although we actually used New England and Massachusetts examples, just because we wanted to be as close as possible to this area, because we understand costing can be different throughout the entire country. And again, just to reiterate, adherence to CSX guidance for physical separation of freight and passenger service also impacts our cost estimates. Next slide, please. So there are a lot of complexities when it comes to operating rail service on freight-owned corridors. Amtrak, as a national passenger railroad, has the right to provide passenger service, but the host railroad, in this case CSX, they set the terms for operating. They're the landlord, essentially. And CSX has told us that their current requirements for letting passenger rail operations on their right-of-way at 90 miles an hour or lower is okay for shared operation. So for the Pittsfield to Springfield and Worcester to Boston segments in all three of the final alternatives, it's assumed that passenger and freight service will operate on shared tracks because the max operating speed is assumed to be below 90. Above 90 miles an hour, CSX requires operation on separate track. And not only separate track, but 30 feet from the existing center line of the freight tracks. And so for the Springfield to Worcester segment, alternative 3 still assumes shared tracks because the speeds are assumed to be lower than 90 miles an hour. With alternative 4 and 4-5 hybrid, the speeds are assumed to be above 90 miles an hour. So our cost assumptions were that we would have to construct a separate passenger-only track. Next slide, please. So what's included in our cost estimates? We start with our base construction cost, all transportation elements, rail, bridges, site work, utilities, things like that. Our cost estimates, our construction cost estimates adhere to CSX guidance for physical separation. On top of the construction cost, we add a 35% contingency just to mitigate the unknowns. FRA guidance is 35%, so that's what we're using, 35%. Professional services. Project development requires permitting, design, engineering. So typically, it's about 30% of the cost. FRA guidance is 20 to 35%. We've included 30% for professional services. Next slide, please. The next item that we looked at was property acquisition. So as you can see, like some of the realignments required property acquisition in concept, and rolling stock vehicles. We also then layered another unallocated contingency on top of all the other stuff that I just talked about. FRA guidance is 5 to 8%, so we just went at the low end of 5%. One thing to note is that as we would go into any future project development, as the cost estimates are refined, the contingencies go down. That's just the nature of the process. Next slide, please. So here are our overall conceptual cost estimates. The rows are extremely similar to the flow chart in the prior slides that I just showed. Again, we have our capital cost estimate low end of $2.4 billion for alternative 3, $4.6 billion for alternative 4 or 5 hybrid. As I had noted a few times with improvements, if you look at the costing for the Springfield to Worcester segment, that's essentially the primary difference between the 3 alternatives. The bookend segments of Pittsfield to Springfield and Worcester to Boston are essentially the same for costing. The difference would also be vehicles, because there's different frequency for the alternatives, as well as operating cost. There's going to be a slightly different operating cost. Next slide, please. So that was our costing. Want to transition to our environmental and community impacts. So compared to alternative 3, impacts to wetlands and open water are about 10 to 12 times greater for alternative 4 and 4 or 5 hybrid. Article 97 land is about 3 to 5 times greater impacted in alternative 4 or 5 hybrid than 3. And alternatives 4 and 4 or 5 hybrid, they essentially create more impacts because they diverge from the existing rail alignment. As noted, alternative 4 and the 4 or 5 hybrid, they're primarily within CSX right of way, but they do have to separate from the freight tracks, so there are more impacts with those alternatives. Next slide, please. Here is more environmental community impact information. For all 3 of the alternatives, some air quality impacts improve and others worsen. I understand at the bottom there's a lot of pluses, but the particulate matter has been combined, so there is some between PM10 and PM2.5, so there is some pluses and some minuses in that particular category. So this represents also decreases in VMT as well as increase in train miles. And next slide, please. This slide represents tabular format of what was talked about in 2 slides prior in terms of impacts. And as you can see, as you go up in the alternatives, there are progressively more impacts. And again, these are primarily related to the separation of freight and passenger tracks in the center segment. Next slide, please. We're going to talk a bit about our benefit cost analysis. So I can lead with what is a benefit cost analysis. This is a comparison of our future no build and build conditions based on a monetization of benefits and project costs versus economic value of social benefits. It's an industry standard way of evaluating a project's cost to benefit value. And so if on the next slide shows what the BCA project benefits are included. This is a US DOT methodology. So again, we have our travel time savings, vehicle operating costs, pavement damage. So these are a lot of things that we've talked about already in our analysis. And the next slide actually represents our cost information. So again, as you saw in our costing, this is a lot of the information that we showed earlier. And so this is a comparison of our benefits to our costs. Next slide. So what do those prior slides really show? This slide represents the results of our benefit cost analysis. And if you go down to the bottom, benefit cost ratio is essentially what's calculated as part of a benefit cost analysis. And if you look at the low end of it's 0.09 and a high end of 0.12 for the ratio. For a project to be federally competitive for funding, it's generally assumed to be a ratio of 1.0. So it's essentially where the benefits are approaching the cost value. So as you can see, the ratios are low in comparison to what makes a project competitive at the federal level under current rules. Next slide, please. So that is the alternatives analysis for the final 3. We are going to pause here and take public comment. The next slide. We're going to take public comment for clarifying questions on what we just presented. We are going to have a few more slides on the recommendations in our final report, and we're just going to also then open it up to just general public comment on the study. So right here, we just want to pause and please limit your questions to any clarifying questions or comments on what we just presented. And then we'll have a more open discussion a little bit later. Thank you.
Right, so I want to back up what Ethan said. We're going to have, plenty of time for conversation, but right now, if you have a clarifying question about what he just presented, you can raise your hand. And if you go into a deep comment or something, we will kind of ask you to stop speaking. But if you have a clarifying question, Kathleen, you've raised your hand. Is it a clarifying question? I think you're unmuted, Kathleen. Okay, no, we're going to go now to Paul Ravina. Paul, a clarifying question. And John Garrett. No, John?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I just have a clarifying question about what Ethan was saying a moment ago about cost-benefit analysis. He mentioned a ratio, and to be perfectly honest with you, I'm not super familiar with the cost. I understand you're talking about a cost of how much this project will take. And I just was curious in what specifically is calculated, somehow into numbers in the benefit part of it. Like, and he mentioned the ratio piece, and I just would love to hear that explained again, if that's possible.
Yeah, why don't we back up a few slides, and thankfully we have the team on the call tonight. So I'm going to turn it over to Sophie, Sophie Cohen, who did the cost benefit analysis.
Emily, can you go back a slide or two?
Yeah, I would say go to the table showing the final. Yeah, that one right there. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks, Ethan. So we look at a handful of different types of benefits. One of the most critical ones is the travel time savings. And so to calculate that, it's based in part on the ridership we're expecting to get for each of the alternatives, as well as how much time they're expected to save on average per rider. We add all those up, and then we apply a federally provided value of travel time savings. Similarly, for safety, for most of the rest of the categories, safety, vehicle operating cost savings, pavement damage, and emissions, we're calculating the total amount of vehicle miles traveled, automobile vehicle miles traveled, that will be saved by people taking rail instead, and applying some values for how many car accidents we think that will prevent, how much payments for taking care of your car, maintenance, gas, all of that. It'll prevent damage to the roadway and automobile emissions. On the flip side of that, we do also have to take into consideration the fact that there are some of those things associated with the additional rail. There's a risk of additional rail incidents, risk of additional, and some additional emissions associated with the rail. And so that's all taken into account here as well. And then we add all that up. Again, we're monetizing it based almost entirely on values provided by the US DOT. So they give how much it costs if you avoid a death, if you avoid an injury, if you avoid a mile's worth of vehicle operating costs, a ton of emissions of different types, all of that. We add that all together. And then we do something called discounting to bring it into the time value of money, account for the time value of money, and then take the total total costs all together, including capital and operating, total benefits, divide the benefits by the costs, and that is how we get the benefit cost ratio.
Sophie, I see another clarifying question. Does the BCA make any assumptions about the price of service to the end user?
No, that is considered a transfer. So in that case, essentially the BCA is looking at sort of the overall welfare. And so we're assuming that the price that the end user pays goes to the operator, and it's sort of a wash. So we don't take that into account. We take into account the cost to operate the service and the benefits that the service provides, but we don't take into account the who pays for that service, whether it's through somebody paying for the fare or the operator. That doesn't matter for a BCA.
Okay, thank you. And Ethan, here's one about air quality. Clarify the air quality impact. Were you talking about construction or operations?
Operations.
That's what I thought. Okay. I think I'm looking quickly at the Q&A, but I think a lot of these are more detailed. Is there anyone else who has a clarifying question? All right, if not, I'd say, Ethan, why don't we move on to those last few slides, and then we can go to general comments and questions.
Sounds good. Great. So Let me start by saying, that the planning phase is, by its very nature, exploratory and intended to start at a very high level of concept with the development of a wide range of alternatives. For this process, we winnowed it down from a couple dozen down to 6 for preliminary analysis and then 3 for final analysis. So as is typical, much of our effort was focused on getting us to a smaller number of alternative options to examine. And so while this study identified opportunities, benefits, impacts, and challenges for west to east passenger rail service, MassDOT acknowledges that there's further planning phase work that's necessary to better understand some of the unknowns before we can initiate a project. So we released the final report on Monday. And as part of our final report, we recommended that these 4 areas are moved forward for further conceptual planning. Sorry. So we wanted to recommend that more detailed study of economic and community benefits is conducted. We looked at the alternatives in the context of a BCA because that's the federal process for competitive funding. But we understand that there are other things such as the transformative nature of an west to east rail service, jobs, real estate, housing. So we understand that there are other things that could be looked at in more detail. So as part of our final report, we recommend a more detailed study. As I noted throughout the study presentation, CSX guidance requires a certain separation of our tracks. So we also recommend further conversations with CSX about the remaining alternatives that we have, 3, 4, 4, 5 hybrid, conversations about their track separation guidance. We also need to further explore freight movements and trends. We also recommend that we should conduct a white paper to better understand the governance structure needs for operating passenger rail service in the Commonwealth. The secretary has said we're not a railroad provider. There is the MBTA service area, and we do have some pilots out there, but we are not set up to be a passenger rail provider. So we recommend a white paper to better understand and guide future discussions. And given how large and complex a project such as this would be, MassDOT, in coordination with elected officials and stakeholders, will explore funding opportunities and obstacles with stakeholders. This includes continuing to refine our costs as new information becomes available, revisit the BCA formula, and start setting up a funding roadmap, essentially. Next slide, please. So again, this is our study process, just revisiting it very quickly. We're at the end. I'm actually going to ask Emily just to advance the next slide because that's actually the important thing. So again, we released the report on Monday. We are leaving it open for a 30-day public comment period. There is a link on the website to be able to submit your comments. They'll come directly to us. It's open until November 19th. And then once we process all our final public feedback, then we will be issuing a final report at the end of November. So with that said, unless I'm missing something, we can open it up to public comment. If you want to advance slide, Emily, that's the same slide as before.
So let me remind everyone that there's a Q&A button. We've got about 40 questions there already. You can press the raise hand button to be recognized, and we'll free you up so you're not muted. I will point out that we have 145 attendees. So if even half of them want to speak, we have a lot of people to hear from. So I'm really going to ask everyone not to take longer than about 2 minutes to ask your question or make your statement. And we'll do our best to answer briskly so that we can get as many comments and questions addressed as possible, with the understanding also, as Ethan said, that you will be able to submit a written comment and have additional time to review the draft final report. First, I will ask if there are any elected officials who would like to make a comment or ask a question. I saw several going through the list of attendees and participants. I don't know if any of them would like to ask a question. I saw Senator Goby, someone from Congressman Moulton's office, Senator Lesser, Representative Smitty, Senator Hines, Representative Smola. Any of you want to speak at this time? Jim Miner from Congressman Moulton's office.
Hi.
Jim.
Thank you so much for putting this together today. This has been wonderful. I was thrilled to see that one of the things being recommended is a more detailed study of economic and community benefits and impacts. I think we agree with that recommendation. And I just love to hear if you could go into any more detail on the additional economic and community benefits and impacts that you expect to be examining.
Thank you, Jim. Ethan?
So if I understand the question, it is what else are we recommending in terms of economic study and community impacts or benefits? So just reading off of the recommendations in the study itself, conducting surveys of both businesses and residents to understand market conditions. So like riders, demographics, fare sensitivity, and other market factors. Work with the business community across the Commonwealth and conduct additional analysis to better understand and articulate the full range of potential economic benefits. This includes trying to understand post-COVID, the new normal conditions. Working with local and regional governments, community members to facilitate land use decisions, a new development that supports and is supported by rail transportation, and that can make travel without automobiles more viable. Neighborhood workshops on community impacts, such as grade crossings, rail crossings, and reviewing and updating cost and ridership estimates periodically. So as we find out more information, we can update all that. And also considering how a price on carbon and VMT fees could impact rail service. So these are types of economic and community benefits we'd like to explore further. And again, we're open for public comment right now. So any kind of additional feedback is welcome.
Thanks, Ethan. Are there any other elected officials who would like to speak at the moment? If not, I'm going to go and take a few of the Q&A questions. Instead of doing the project all at once, would it be possible to start with service from the Brookfields, Charlton, Spencer, Leicester, Auburn? That could build demand that would help the complete project to happen, and that's Paul Ravina. So again, service from the Brookfields, Charlton, Spencer, Leicester, and Auburn.
So we're not prepared to talk about phasing at this point. As so the recommendations in the study are that at this early stage, we really can't talk about phasing. Just it's not we don't have a project yet, so we don't really know exactly what phasing we could do. So that's something that we could look at in the future, though.
Thank you. Question about whether Mr. Strauss would like to know if efforts have been made to reach out to New York State DOT to involve them in the final 37 miles to Albany Rensselaer.
So we have not. To be clear, this was a study to look at passenger rail service between Pittsfield and Boston. That's not to say that any kind of future analysis could look at something like that.
Robert Stearns, where did I just lost him. Yeah, Robert Kearns, has MassDOT spoken with CSX? Is there any agreement with CSX?
So we still have to have further conversations with CSX.
Okay, thanks. Let me move over to hands up. Mr. Ravina, you've had a question, so I'm not going to recognize you right now. Bob Daly? Is he unmuted, Emily?
He's unmuted.
Nancy, can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bob Daly and Rich Holzman, representing the town of Chester, which will be the future rail hub for the 21 hill towns. A brief comment from me and then from Rich. Sisters and brothers of the Fellowship of the Rail, this is not even the beginning of the end, just the end of the beginning. We will be successful by going forward from this result without loss of enthusiasm. We cannot have come this far after 2 years' time and treasure spent to be left at the intersection of more studies and no action. We believe the MassDOT BCA, benefit cost analysis, should have been viewed through the aperture of a BCA known as benefit commonwealth analysis, in which speed of implementation and ridership projections leading to transformative economic rebirth are the priority values. Equality of access, liberty of mobility, fraternity of connectivity is what our people need now, and future generations will require to maintain Massachusetts leadership in our nation. We urge MassDOT to set an 18-month urgency of now timeline for a phase 1 and deploy existing DMU train sets for daily intercommunity service in Western Massachusetts. Overnight the trains on the Chester siding and the crews in a nearby B&B. Start tomorrow with the single existing track and start the day after restoring the double track. Finally, the M in MBTA, I believe, equals Massachusetts. In 75 years, the MBTA has expanded to include 400 miles of track through 175 communities with 141 stations. None west of Worcester. It's not right, it's not just, it cannot stand. I turn it over to my associate, Richard Holzman.
Okay, Richard, you're tight on time.
Okay, just to add to that, I can understand how you got to reach out for CSX and other process requirements to plan next steps. But I urge you to make sure that it doesn't get buried in studies that go on ad nauseum. We need to get action. The timing is now. We have to reimagine in the light of pandemic and all the other things that are going on in this country today and in the Commonwealth, that we take action sooner rather than later and maintain the momentum that's been generated by the study and by the attention given by people all over the Commonwealth. And now is the time to really connect Western Massachusetts, not only because we represent Western Massachusetts, but in the enlightened self-interest of the people east of us, because the population density mandates that people relieve the pressure in the east to come west. Right now, we've had one of the biggest real estate booms that have gone on here in years, because people aren't talking about weekend homes. They're talking about homes where they share time. They live basically half the week in a portion of the week in the east and a portion of the week in the west, working in both places to achieve economic vitality and a safer and healthier living with a higher quality of life. So I urge you, please, you've done fine work to this point, but let's not get bogged down in a lot of further study that's just going to slow the whole rate of implementation. Thank you.
Thank you both. Larry Blake.
I was also going to ask about connect.
Sorry, we just lost you, I think. Mr. Blake.
Can you hear me?
Try again, yeah.
Okay. I said the first question I had was about connecting Pittsfield and Albany, but that since that's already been asked, I'll ask my alternate question. There is a plan for a high speed rail that follows roughly part of this route, and I was wondering whether there was any possibility of connecting the two projects.
Ethan, do you know what that is?
Are you, Larry, are you referring to the Northern New England Intercity Rail Initiative study?
I'm not sure. There's so many studies that I get lost, but there was one with they were looking at high-speed rail for the Northeast corridor. And one of them veered out towards the west, one of the routes they were looking at, along Hartford.
I believe, well, yes, it could either be Northern New England Intercity Rail Initiative or the NEC Future, which was a federal initiative. But
right.
So as far as the Northern New England Intercity Rail Initiative, our study built upon that study because NERI did not achieve the travel time or speeds that that some folks wanted. So we initiated the West-East study to be able to lower travel times by increasing speeds. So you can really combine the two. Ours built upon the prior study.
Thanks, Ethan. I'm going to go to a couple of the Q&A questions. I think it's too early for this question, but Christopher Parker, did you consider tilting equipment? How much time could tilting equipment save for each alternative, and how much with tilting equipment increase the equipment cost and revenue? It's a little too early for that, isn't it? Or am I wrong?
So maybe. I actually don't think it's, I believe, Drew, you on the
and tilting equipment would offer a 5-7% improvement in travel time. But as current part of the CSX guidance is they don't accept that operation in a tilting feature. So even if you had the equipment, you wouldn't be able to take advantage of it on the majority of the route.
Okay. All right, thank you. Let's see. Let me see. A couple of these we've actually addressed. There's a clarifying question. Will there be no local stops between Palmer and Worcester? This person says it didn't hear the answer.
I think I saw that question. Is the question, is there no...
Will there be no local stops between Palmer and Worcester?
Correct.
Okay.
But Palmer will be a stop.
Right, okay. Dan Hodge asks, why are the emissions benefit negative with more people taking the train rather than driving their car? This seems like a surprising result.
So I'm not prepared to speak about the air quality in detail, but Ned, would you like to answer the air quality?
I would actually, and that's actually based on the calculated emissions for the trains, and I will defer to Sophie, who actually took a pretty deep dive on what is a more complicated issue than I had expected.
Yeah, so we looked at both the decrease in emissions from the reduction in automobiles, which there certainly is some, but we also had to take into account the increase in rail service. And unfortunately, diesel trains are kind of dirty. You know, they're getting better, but they still emit a fair amount, and the offsetting automobile reduction in automobiles was not enough to offset the increase in rail based on you know, the best available data on how many emissions are associated with rail service and driving. You know, as some of that technology gets better, there is an opportunity for that gap to shrink a little bit, and I hope that that happens. But again, based on the sort of best available data, that's what we found.
Thanks, Sophie. I think you must have said final report at some time and left the draft out. So William Strauss, the chairman, probably picked up on that. So we're gonna say that we are asking everyone for their comments on the draft final report. So please, yes, we didn't want to make that mistake. There's a lot of words flying back and forth. Let's see. Will the train stop at Fenway Park on game days? Now that's a really important question. And I don't know that we have the answer right now, but I thought I would share it with you. Can you explain what a white paper, oh, I'm sorry. Do you have an answer, Ethan?
So if please, one of the team, correct me if I'm wrong, but Lansdowne was one of the stops in our ridership?
Yes, we expressly included it, and we tried to time the trains around sports events, depending on the time of year.
Brilliant, thank you. Maybe there'll be a good team by then. Oh, sorry. Can you explain what a white paper is, Ethan?
Okay. So a white paper is essentially a shorter study, I guess you could say. It involves research, it involves literature research, trying to understand the current landscape. And sometimes it does include a bit of an analysis, but essentially it's a literature research, but it's also meant to guide future discussions.
Will the November 30th report include the further study that's recommended? If not, if approved, what would be the estimated time it would take to complete?
So no, the final report will not include the additional analysis or in the recommendations. Cannot speak to a timeline. We were just focused on getting the report completed and out the door, and then we can have further conversations about moving forward with next steps.
Thanks, Ethan.
But the primary thing is that we're recommending it and we're committing to it.
So this gentleman asks, and I don't know if anyone would know this, what some of the benefit cost ratios were for other regional rail projects, such as Amtrak service from Pittsfield to Boston, Pioneer Valley service, Hartford Line, Downeaster. I mean, were they competitive? And we may not know that answer. And I'm not hearing anyone jump, so I'm going to go on. Who actually makes the final determination of which option 3, 4, 4, 5 is put forward to the powers that make a decision whether to go forward or not? And let me just say, first of all, it's important that you weigh in with your opinion. So that's the very first step. Ethan?
So that really depends on a lot of the next steps, meaning part of our next steps is to look at a governance structure for a passenger rail authority. So we also have to do more analysis on all of the alternatives. So, it could be that as part of further analysis, some of the alternatives float. One of the alternatives float higher than the other. So it's a collective decision overall. But at this point, it's really about moving forward to next steps.
I'm going to go back to some of the hands raised, and I don't know if this is Andre or Andra Ferreira.
Yep, it's Andre Ferreira.
Andre, sorry.
Mine's more a comment building off of what Bob Daly had said earlier. I'm someone who commutes from Ludlow, Massachusetts to right outside Government Station in Boston daily. And I see the 1 hour and 37-minute mark for the best option from Springfield to Boston. And it's just not something that you see and you look at the time that it takes 8 in your car and actually drive to Boston is convincing to actually use the rail. Now, I know you used existing numbers that you guys have for commuting to forecast what the ridership would be, but that doesn't take into consideration where if you could reduce the time on these trips, it would actually drive up the use and decrease carbon emissions for people taking trains versus rail. Now, the MBTA takes a portion of everyone's taxes in Massachusetts, a portion of the budget every year, that goes to what they fund. The MBTA is currently working on a $2.28 billion Green Line extension project $8 billion South Rail project. And quite frankly, we still haven't finished paying off for the Big Dig. So I was wondering, and I guess what my question is when is the state going to start prioritizing Western Mass a little bit more?
There are a couple of other questions like that in the Q&A, so you can consider that, Ethan, just a general comment, I imagine. Unless you want to add something. Okay.
No.
Donald Blaze, sorry again, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing it.
No, that's okay. You said my name correctly. That doesn't always happen. Well, first, I'm from Palmer. I'm glad that Palmer is listed in all three of these these options. I'm very glad to see that our advocacy has been working thus far. Personally, I want to go with the faster option. So I guess that's hybrid 4 and 5. But in terms of what was said at the end in the last slide, I understand that there's further studies that have to be done on this. But in terms of the economic and community impacts, I know that Palmer and UMass did come up with a study last year before the world went south. And I know that that was presented to the committee. Now, I don't know if that was taken into account. I hope it was, because there is growth opportunity here in Palmer and the region. We can't delay any longer. It was bad enough before the pandemic hit. It is worse now. The budgetary, the economic impacts we are going to be feeling, if not already. So we can't keep pushing this further down the road. And so I'm glad that Palmer is on all three options. I want to go the faster option, but any option that includes Palmer and the surrounding region will be great for this area, because we're going to need it to get out of the damage from this pandemic. And so to everyone involved with this, thank you. I know there's more to be done. We're lucky to have some great advocates in the legislature. I know Senator Goby is on the call, and Senator Lesser and Representative Smolla. You know, everyone, you've done a very good job. We got to keep going forward to make this a reality. And that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I think David Phillips, you have your hand up. Go ahead, Mr. Phillips. I think you're unmuted. All right, we've lost him. Joshua?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thanks for having me in this group and meeting. Yes, because I've also been pushing for this as well, because a while back in high school, I created a Facebook group called Create Commuter Rail Service from Boston to Western Massachusetts. And yeah, and the next thing, years later, I see you guys doing the same thing. And I've been in support of that since I was in high school. And I think rail service like this would actually boost the state's economy, as well as Northern Connecticut's economy, especially with the casinos going on as well. And I'm wondering, have they reached any agreements about the Route 2 corridor? Because I read in the paper about, securing the rail service going from Fitchburg to North Adams, Massachusetts.
Well, I don't know if we know about that, Joshua, but thank you for asking that question. Do we know about that, anyone?
Yeah, there is legislation that speaks to a study between North Adams and Fitchburg. It's the northern tier. So there is legislation out there.
Okay. Thank you. And Joshua, thanks for giving us the idea all those years ago. There's someone who thinks you should do the onboard announcements on the train because you have a soothing voice, Ethan. So that's a nice comment. Will the final report have a preferred alternative? I think you explained that, but maybe it's worth going through again, Ethan, briefly.
Yeah, no, glad to, or happy to explain it again. You know, at the end of a study, sometimes we recommend we recommend no build. Sometimes we recommend a build alternative. So for this study, we feel that there's further conceptual planning analysis that's necessary before we can actually identify what a project would be. So we do not recommend moving forward with alternative 3, 4, or 4 or 5 hybrid. But we do recognize that the advisory committee has a strong preference for the 4 or 5 hybrid. So instead, we're recommending further analysis to conclude the conceptual planning phase. And after that, we can hopefully move forward with an actual project.
Okay, thank you. And that's summarized again in the draft report. So.
Yes.
Okay, let's see. Let me just get another one. There are a lot, just so people know, I know there are quite a few Q&As, but a lot of them are about the same topics. And well, let's see. Tracy Opolinski is Vice President of Ware Business and Civic Association, representing 60 businesses in the Ware area. So I presume she's here in support. She's asking a question about if the BCA would meet the federal funding level if the study were to include a 25-mile ridership, including Amherst-Palmer connection, and would greatly benefit the Commonwealth's anchor university by connecting students to Boston, access for internships, and growing the biotech sector. Is there any possibility of including this data in the next steps and report?
I would certainly encourage her to submit that comment.
Okay.
But I can't commit to any of the details of the future steps yet.
And there are several comments about Western Mass being left out of the state's economic development picture, and that this part of the state has a great deal to offer, but also needs new development. So there are quite a few of those, just for everyone's information. And then there are a couple of people who have asked about whether there are other proxies that could be used to estimate ridership, like the Providence line. And I think someone else suggested another one. But I think if someone can speak to the proxies and why they were chosen, that might be helpful, Ethan.
Most definitely. That's you, Laura.
Okay, thank you. So we look at a lot of different factors when we were choosing a proxy for the station, or for the service in particular. And one of the key criteria was that it would be regionally appropriate, because it captures a lot of underlying characteristics that we're not modeling for specifically. So that's why we were limited to this area. The Providence line was one that was recommended to us in the process as well, but it would operate similarly to the Downeaster version that we did end up using, as well as it has a much more of a commuter line, shorter characteristic that would perhaps be a slightly not as appropriate as the Downeaster. So that's that one specifically. But the main answer there is we were trying to choose regionally appropriate proxy services.
Thanks, Laura. Sam Hudzik,
Nancy, I just wanted to add that the radius that was used for calculating potential ridership was 20 miles, but it's a straight line radius measured from the train station, and it includes any sort of demographic zones that radius touches. So that does include most of Amherst and all of Northampton.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks, Ned, for that. Let's see, Lawrence Schaffer, you have your hand up. And there we go. I think you should be unmuted.
Thank you very much for recognizing me. I'm president of the Central Corridor Passenger Rail Coalition, and we're very interested and have been for about 8 years now, the connection between Brattleboro, Vermont, all the way to New London, Connecticut. So although Amherst has played a very important part of that in terms of its capability of putting people into rail seats, there is an awful lot of other passengers, potential passengers, that might avail themselves. And of course, the key to all of the Central Corridor is the connection in Palmer that takes us east and west. So there's an opportunity for synergy here between the Central Corridor people and the east-west people to not only provide additional service across the board, but to really, really vitalize that line going into Boston for those people that are coming north or going north or south and connecting in Palmer on into Boston. So I want to make sure that our role is an important one to have in this study, and that we want to make sure that we have plenty of input into that.
Thank you very much. David Phillips, you have your hand up. There we go. Mr. Phillips, you are unmuted on our end. All right, maybe we'll come back to you. Mark Schaap. Emily, can you unmute him? Seem to be having muting problems here. Mr. Schaap? No, all right. Brett Provost?
Hello, sorry, I just got my microphone. Is it okay if I still go?
Who is that, Mr. Schaap?
No, I just got an unmute. I'm John Garrett.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Yep, all right, so this is gonna sound a little bit harsh, but I think Governor Baker and Secretary Pollock are cowards, and they don't wanna openly kill East-West Rail, but this study, is pretty clearly trying to do so with a couple different ways. I was looking at the Transit Matters website, and they were talking about how the cost of this study was 2 to 3 times that of the previous NERI study. And I know the costs were, the ridership projections were something that MassDOT had to go back and revise. And frankly, there's been a number of different situations where the Department of Transportation under Governor Baker has made it very clear that they're willing to inflate costs in order to make projects unfeasible. And I feel for the folks who did this study, like Ethan and the other folks who spoke up, who are doing their darndest to give us the most careful analysis they can, because I think there's real strong political pressure involved here. So and my other comment really is about the part of this that I find the most troubling. I could accept the idea that you need more detailed economic study, that you need to explore opportunities with railroad partners, and especially the governance options. I think these are legitimate study kind of conclusions, but there is absolutely zero timetable to this study. And that's really telling from a governor who got letters from Peter Picnelli telling him to kill this. And there's no accountability, there's no timetable. This is trying to basically drown this study in the dark. Frankly, this is a stressful time period, and it's distressing to see things happen that should be happening in public in a public meeting. And I suspect they would go differently than the governor and the secretary suspect they'll go right now. I think the Department of Transportation is Department of Too Many Studies, or Department of Studying Studies, or something like that. I have the questions, if this was really intended to make something happen. There was a caller earlier who basically mentioned the Pan Am sale and the fact that there's an east-west rail line running between North Adams and Boston. If this was a flexible study that was intended to actually make a project happen, you could have extended the study and had a good faith effort to study other options if CSX wasn't going to play ball in a way that made this economically feasible. But good faith hasn't been shown, and it's a consistent pattern here that you have creative interpretations of metrics to reach a preordained conclusion. I mean, and that's not so much a question as just a comment about this whole process. I saw the NERI process go on, and that was only 4 years ago. And it's frankly insulting that the folks who did this study are put in this position where, as professionals, they're forced to lie for the governor and his, private enterprise oriented mindset. And so I just think it's a shame. And I think that, the Governor Baker should be ashamed, and anyone who's involved with this that is trying to bury the truth, that this is a project the people of Massachusetts want and have demanded for years, and should frankly be happening on an expedited basis in the light of what's going on in the world, and not a nebulous timetable that has no accountability whatsoever. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Mr. Garrett. John Pelletier, or Pelletier, however you say it.
There we go. Just got the unmute. Thank you. I would certainly like to echo what the previous person said. Certainly there's concerning elements. John Pelletier, Newton, Massachusetts. So I'm coming at things from the other end of the rail line. When you look at the projections from the Downeaster, from the articles that were written back in 2012, you were already seeing it double what the ridership projection was. And I know there's been significant issues with that. We also, with this study currently, I know they went back to the drawing table and, certainly updated things. I think we've seen the projected ridership, significantly increase on the CT line from what it was originally projected. COVID notwithstanding, for sure. But I think, when we look at these things, we see that once they are implemented, they are successful, and they can be far more successful than the studies show and then the original ridership studies show. So I think the most important thing is that this continues, moving forward. And I'm a project manager. I work at Harvard. And one of the things that's always critical when we're doing any type of large project is, where is the timeline? Again, to the previous person, it's unclear about these types of nebulous next step white paper recommendations. And it's certainly important that the governance board and governance of what this would look like be solved, but there is no even rough timeline of what this would look like. And that is very concerning, because that means it'll just go on and on and on. And when you do that, you don't get a successful project at the end. So I just want to say, very supportive of this from the other end of the line, and really looking forward to having this happen in our state. If we were a country in another part of the world, we already would have had this. And it's frankly disgraceful that it's taken this long, but I appreciate it. Keep it moving forward. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. Well, Barbara, you have your hand up.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I echo the last few comments, and especially started to pay attention with the man who raised the issue of the northern tier line. I was shocked that the moderator had not heard of it, and that that Ethan just sort of mentioned, oh yes, there's legislation. I had heard of it as soon as that legislation was mentioned in the news media, maybe once. I'm one of those people who did buy a house out west while working in the Boston area. We bought what was meant to be a retirement home out here in North Adams. And of course, with the pandemic, we've found that we can teach online from out here. My husband and I, we teach college in the Boston area. And so we've shut down our house in Boston and have happily come here full time. And as we get older, we really, really have hoped that the rail connection would get better. And so I've been following the rail situation. My husband has taken the Amtrak a couple of times, and it's just been horrible, with the delays and from CSX. And And so I've just been shocked by, you know, things like the lack of a timetable and some of the comments about this being buried, and the Department of Studies and so forth really ring true to me. By the way, I have a PhD in economics from Harvard from a few decades ago, and so I do know something about these sorts of topics. And you know, I saw that cost benefit analysis and I thought, why is that a negative number? That's ridiculous. And so I really echo these last few comments. And in this era of climate change, you know, I just think this is terrible. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay, thank you. Rob Kusner, KUSNER.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. I'm a professor of mathematics at UMass Amherst, and I attended the most recent hearing in Springfield, I guess in February, just before COVID. And I've been for a couple decades deeply involved in the Amherst area, both as a select board member and as someone who's worked on state projects like the reconstruction of the Norwottuck Rail Trail, which is no longer a railroad, but just a nice multi-use path that eventually will connect from Northampton to the Boston area. But the Amherst campus, more than 150 years ago, was established in part because it was on the junction of 2 rail lines, an east-west line and nearly on the north-south line. Northampton nearby is a railroad city where those north-south, east-west lines met, and Amherst also has a meeting of the north-south and east-west line. There were people from the highest administration at that meeting. Steve Goodwin was among the people there. And I was surprised, since many people from the area, actually from Palmer and from the Amherst area, recommended that the university have at least a seat, if not many seats at the table. The University of Massachusetts is one of the largest investments, probably the largest investment by the Commonwealth basically west of Route 128. And although this year there aren't many students on campus, it's one of the major, a railroad would be one of the, a passenger railroad would be one of the major ways that people from the most populous parts of the Commonwealth could arrive on campus. It's a way that faculty and staff and students could travel back and forth to, like any other modern country, by rail to the airports, to the other universities like the previous speaker may work at. And what I don't understand, in addition to the lack of a timeline for going forward with this potential project, is why the university has still no seats at the table. No one on the board seems to have any affiliation with the university. And I really hope that if it's at the universities and that they didn't want to engage, I hope you'll engage with people in the Amherst area. I volunteer. Okay.
Thank you. We appreciate that. Thanks for your comments. We are at 7:28. Let's see, Brett Provost, I had to skip you before. If you can get it in 2 minutes, go for it.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm sorry, missed the opening statements, and I attended the meeting in February where the 6 options were presented, and I was a little confused, especially after seeing that the trade-off of emissions was actually not a positive thing using diesel rail, and especially over the past year with commitments from Governor Baker and the House passing a number of different plans to combat the climate crisis. Just a little confused on if there is no trade-off for the carbon emissions. And our state is moving in this direction of net zero by 2050. It almost seems by the time we get to 2050, we're going to be having this discussion all over again. And I would just like to understand kind of a question, kind of a statement of why option 6, the electrified rail, is not even still being considered, especially with the massive movement in kind of commitment from the governor and the House.
Thank you. Can we give a quick answer to that? If you were to look at the a couple of the previous presentations, you really would see in detail, and also based on the comments that came in from people during that time period. But can we give a quick answer, Ethan? Or
sure. So when we were at the advisory committee meeting to narrow down from 6 to 3 alternatives, as well as all the feedback we received via email, was that while alternative 6, which was the electrified option that would have traveled along the Mass Pike, while it would have achieved the highest speeds and lowest travel time, there was a major concern about the permitting as well as the cost. So for those reasons, we removed alternative 6 from the analysis of the final 3.
Thank you, Ethan. And it is now 7:31. And so what I'm going to do is thank everyone for participating. If you submitted more than one question or raised your hand more than once, I tried to get to people who hadn't asked a question yet. So I apologize that you didn't get a second opportunity. But in our time frame, I hope that you will send us comments on the draft report by November 19th. This slide has the information. You can also just go to the website and mass.gov/East-West Passenger Rail Study, and you'll find the form. It's the first document on the top of the page. After November 19th, the team will be preparing the final report for November 30th. We'll let you know when it's available and post it online. By then, you will have had a great Thanksgiving. So we'll wish you a happy one right now. Thank you again for all your participation, for your ideas, your suggestions. We understand the project is very important to many people, and we take these comments very seriously. So wish you a good night. I thank all the team members who participated, and thank you all for your questions and your kind thoughts, and wish you a good night.
Good night.